Hello everyone, and welcome to the Kansas City Zoo in Kansas City, Missouri. For our wild discoveries today, we're getting a chance to look at several wild animals from all over the world, conveniently located in the beautiful Kansas City Zoo, which is one of my favorites to visit year after year whenever I pop down to Missouri to visit my family. You guys know by now how much I love visiting high-quality AZA accredited zoos. Not only are there so many fascinating animals there, but there are so many curious kids and adults running around getting a chance to learn about some of the fantastic creatures we all share this world with. As havens for stunning wild animals and public education, nothing inspires me more than getting to see a high-quality zoo in action. But okay, enough about all that and more about some of the awesome animals that we saw. It was a beautiful and very busy spring day when we visited the Kansas City Zoo this year, and it was so much fun to see how many kids were running from place to place watching all of the animals who were really alert and at the front of their exhibits because it was such a nice day and everyone wanted to just enjoy the wonderful scent of honeysuckle and the nice spring air. And it was so much fun to go into the open air aviaries where we could be really close to the birds and really watch them get up to all sorts of antics. The straw-necked Ibis actually swooped Chip several times and then pecked at his shoes. Maybe they were feeling a little feisty because so many of the birds were very territorial over nesting space in the Australian aviary. The seagulls that were there were very busy setting up nests, but I couldn't see any eggs inside. And at a couple points, a couple of the female seagulls actually sat down and roosted on top of small rocks. So that kind of cracked me up, but overhead there were several species of doves and a few pigeons that were busy breaking off branches from the trees and setting up little nests of their own. So I think spring was definitely in the air, and it definitely made the birds there a lot more active and really fun to watch. Watching the seagulls fly overhead and the ducks waddle underfoot also made me laugh because I'm pretty sure my Australian friends wouldn't think of a few of those species as being exotic enough to put into a zoo, but it just reminded me how the creatures that we see outside of our window often other people might take for granted as just there's tons of those animals, they always live around me. But remember guys, whatever may feel normal to you might be really exotic and fascinating to someone else. So it's always a lot of fun to try to learn a little bit about your native flora and fauna, because if you ever run into some friends from other places in the world, they might really have a fantastic time learning about the bird that sits outside of your window every morning, even though you think it's just a plain tawny frogmouth, and who would want to know about its awesome ability to try to sit and look like a stick? Oh, they're just so cool. Look at this guy. Not to mention, just watching all of the birds, I was so fascinated by how beautiful and how different they are. There's thousands and thousands of species of bird, and I have to admit guys, one of my goals in the future is definitely to be able to travel the world with you and take you everywhere I can go in order to see how many different species of birds I can find. So just keep that in mind, and maybe in a few years I'll be able to take you all to Costa Rica or some really exotic places to see some fascinating species. By the way, have I ever told you guys that when Chips lived in China for a while as a teacher, he actually got the opportunity to hold and feed a red panda at their panda sanctuary? I'm so envious because these guys are great climbers and they're so adorable to watch. And from what Chips tells me, they also really love apples. Oh, and I don't know about you guys, but does anyone else ever feel like llamas have a personal vendetta for them? And one of the unexpected highlights of visiting the Kansas City Zoo definitely turned out to be the chance to see Josie and her 2-year-old son Dusty out in their enclosure. I had heard that Josie had had a baby orangutan a long time ago, and I thought that was really cute, but this was the first time that I really got to see the two of them interact out in public, and it was really stunning. Although all the kids thought that, baby Dusty was really adorable, they would look at him for a few minutes and coo and then run away to go play on the playground equipment. Chips and I ended up standing there watching the two of them interact for about half an hour at least. The way Josie snuggled her son and the way that he would play with her hair and pull on her fur and then eventually run off to be able to go totter around was just so much the way that you see a parent and child interact in humans. It was so much fun to watch Dusty crawl around on the floor and pull up leaves and nibble on different pieces, the way that he used his hands, the way that Josie and Dusty were clearly watching all of the guests who were around them. There was just no way that we could look at them and not see a glimmer of a deep, deep intelligence. Chips feels very strongly about orangutans and all of the chimps and ape family. So if you guys ever get the opportunity, definitely do some more research into how intelligent these ones are, and then really, really try to understand the impact that our daily choices in food can have with palm oil, and Josie and Dusty getting a chance to live in the wild. On some less serious notes, it was also fun to see some Missouri natives skittering by on the ground as we were walking around. Although zoos are full of wild animals, make sure you keep your eyes open for some of the natives to the area too. But the true star of the show and the highlight of our visit to Kansas City Zoo was definitely Dixie, the 4-month-old baby giraffe who had finally been put out on exhibit only a couple weeks before we arrived. When I saw her from a distance, I whipped out my wildlife camera and nearly fell into a bush trying to zoom in on all of her adorable little spots. I couldn't believe how small she was. Even though she's already much taller than me at only 4 months old, she was dwarfed by the other giraffes in the herd with her, and it was so much fun to see how just cute she was. Extremely fluffy with some of the fluffiest ossicones, those two kind of horn-like projections on top of their head that I have ever seen on a giraffe. And I have to say, for someone who is just recently obsessed and totally in love with giraffes, it completely filled my heart to be able to stand on the new pavilion and have the giraffes walk up so close to us as they moved about, gathering leaves and hay from their feeders and trying to peck what they could off of the tops of the trees. Giraffes may not move very quickly, and a lot of people might think that, they just stand there. But the longer that Chips and I also stood there and watched them, the more we could really see how carefully the entire herd was examining all of the different areas, keeping a careful eye on the Canadian geese, also native creatures to the area, who were inhabiting their exhibit too, and kind of keeping a collective eye out on Dixie. Males usually roam around in bachelor herds and don't really have a lot to do with the raising of young giraffes, but I couldn't help but notice that everybody was at least watching what the youngster was up to, in the very quiet, careful way that giraffes will slowly study an area and flip their ears towards a source. For the most part, Dixie stayed near her mother's side, and while her mother walked around browsing on some of the new spring greenery, and she stood very carefully and stared at everything with a very concerned expression every time a goose honked, or especially when the rhinoceros, who Chips and I had no idea shared their exhibit, suddenly appeared out of the bushes and spooked a bunch of the Canadian geese. She was also very curious about some of the other four-legged creatures who shared her exhibit with her and would stand and stare and watch them for so long. She really was ridiculously, objectively cute. I'm not really sure why I have fallen so hardcore and in love with giraffes, but I think maybe it has a little bit to do with the lessons I've taken from bird watching. A lot of people, especially the young people who were crowding around my arms while we were watching her, tend to want to see an animal be really flashy and fast, to do tricks or to move around quickly. And giraffes don't really do that. Every now and then they might reach their extremely long tongue up to be able to gather some leaves, but the most rewarding part of watching giraffes for me is kind of the same rewarding part of bird watching: being patient and watching for a long time for small little movements that really show you a lot more about what the animal is thinking or doing, or the way they interact with their environment, than if you just stopped by the exhibit for a few minutes and then kept moving because the giraffes weren't moving. So just remember that next time you're at a zoo. Although sometimes the creatures seem to not really be doing anything, the longer you watch them, the more you will be able to see how they interact with their environment in their own unique ways. And if you follow what they're doing, you might even be really surprised, like discovering a rhinoceros hiding in some bushes, or just being able to watch a little baby discover the world for the first time.